And welcome to our first lecture on Art of the Islamic World, where we'll be heading to South and Central Asia as well as Spain. So you had a few assigned resources for this unit, and you should have been taking notes, but do not forget to take detailed notes during these lectures. Don't start to shorten and condense them now, because the details that you're learning today, it will be difficult to remember in May when you have your cumulative final exam. And then most key terms are on the handout. Okay, so in Islam literally means submission to one God. Note that Allah is the Arabic word for God. Okay, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all are Abrahamic religion, or all are of the Abrahamic tradition. So consider it like a tree and branches coming off of that, like the beginning of the Torah, the Old Testament, the beginning of the Quran have pretty much the same stories. So Muhammad was born in 632, and Islam spread very quickly in the 7th century. They conquered much of the world from Arabia, Palestine, Syria, Iraq, northern Egypt, Spain, pretty quickly. Muslim means those who submit and to Allah. India, Muslim rule was established in the 13th century. The Taj Mahal is an Islamic mausoleum. Spain, the Arabs overthrew the Christian Visigoths in 711. Early architecture that we'll look at are both religious and secular. The art that we'll look at is non-figural. If you'll remember from the documentary, numerous religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam have gone through periods of saying that figures can lead to idolatry. Judaism has had that for a much longer period of time, and then when Jewish converts converted to Islam, many of them took this idea into Islam, so that's when it was adopted in Islam as well. If you haven't yet watched that TED Ed over the geometry of Islamic design, there's this emphasis on mathematical precision, geometry, this infinite nature. Consider it a reflection of paradise and infinity and just beauty. Calligraphy is highly revered. Pilgrimage is important to the Kaaba in Mecca. This is part of the Hajj, in which one must commit to once in their life, if they're able to, of going to the Kaaba in Mecca. And the Dome of the Rock is in Jerusalem, are two important pilgrimage sites. They're from earlier time periods, so we study those in the fall, of course. Many artworks that we'll study have Persian influence. They had quite an influence on secular Islamic art. Secular meaning artworks we'll see for royalty and whatnot. And Islamic metalwork was highly regarded during the medieval ages. We'll look at an art piece where the French royal family even used Islamic metalwork. So the Islamic Caliphate, the Islamic world spread very quickly. And we are going to begin in South Asia, India, in Agra. So we're looking under the Mughal Empire, 1526 to 1857, at its height and the largest, circa 1700. And we are looking at the Taj Mahal. So the Taj Mahal, you may automatically assume it is a mosque. You've already had some assigned resources over mosque architecture. You'll likely recognize the minarets, where the call to prayer would be called from here. Now speakers are adjusted there, or placed there. These help mosques to really stand out in a city. The dome and the architecture in general, these niches, are indicative of Islamic architecture. However, this is actually a mausoleum. The dome, this onion-shaped dome, is specific to this region. Also, it's used by Orthodox churches. So this is under the Mughal dynasty. We will look at this guy's father in an artwork next, Emperor Jahangir. But the patron of the Taj Mahal was Prince Khurram, and once he became emperor, he declared himself Shah Jahan I, which means king of the world. He eliminated his rivals in 1628. And this is a mausoleum dedicated to his wife, Mumtaz Mahal, the chosen one of the palace. So she was his beloved. They had 13 children together. Well, the 14th, she actually died in childbirth, giving birth to their 14th child in 1631. He looked to her as a counselor. Actually, when she had died, she was actually at a field of war. He had taken her along for consulship, etc., or to help figure out how to best achieve victory in that battle. Anyway, and so she was beloved and greatly revered by him. And so this is pretty much his continuous love letter to her. The mausoleum is dedicated to her. In 1666, Shah Jahan died, and he is interred next to her. He was originally meant to be placed elsewhere, but his rule didn't end so well, and so he was placed next to her. You'll see how you can tell it didn't originally belong, or it wasn't the intended place of his rest. Okay, so here's the Taj Mahal. Now, here's one of the famous places that I had the great opportunity to go to when I was a little kid. So that was a cool experience. We are standing on the back of the Taj Mahal, and if you'll notice, the surrounding structure, the wall that surrounds it, and the other buildings, in fact, are of this red brick. And consider how that red brick just so greatly contrasts with the white marble and how it makes it stand out even more. It's also along this river, the Yamuna River. So it is a mausoleum dedicated to his wife. We talked about the minarets, the onion dome. Now, some interesting architectural elements is we're looking at this more from ground level, but if we were looking at it directly in front of it, you'd be centrally placed. You'd be able to tell that the height of the dome is equal to the height of this front facade. And then the size of the dome actually also fits into each half of the structure. So like the dome would fit on this half, this horizontal half facade, and this half. So there's the Taj Mahal is such a testament, of course, to his love, to artistry, to architectural excellence, as well as balance. So this idea of balance, of this geometry, this mathematical precision, and so we see that. Now, Taj means crown, Mahal means palace, so palace of the crown, and this is supposed to represent this palace in paradise. Think of the documentary that you watched, The Art of Paradise, and so we're seeing that play out with this structure. It's surrounded by waterways, fountains, this meticulously planned gardens and floras. So again, this idea of the gardens of paradise. Remember, Islam originated in a desert region. So if you're thinking of the ideal environment, you're thinking of a very luscious water garden, essentially. And so this makes sense that the idea of the heavens involves water and gardens. So here it is a little bit closer, and as you can see, it's massive. Look at the tourists coming to view it. So here's a better depiction of just how white it is, and you can see it's marble. And we have we're not going to see depictions of figures, and in this case even animals, so we have the floral motifs as well as the Islamic calligraphy from the Quran. So it has surahs or verses from the Quran. Now these niches are called makurnas, and they're this archetypal form of Islamic architecture. We'll see a later version of this honeycomb pattern, but note that these dome niches are makurnas associated with Islamic architecture. So here again are these inlaid semi-precious stones, the repeating geometry of these floral motifs, and the Arabic calligraphy. These verses from the Quran, I mean, look at how well Arabic lends itself to just being its own work of art. This calligraphy is beautiful. So according to the Taj Mahal website, The majority of the text is taken from the Quran. There are 22 passages in all, including 14 whole chapters, some of which are read out as part of the Islamic funerary ceremony itself. The inscriptions on the exterior walls of the tomb leave one in no doubt about the impending doom that awaits unbelievers on the Day of Judgment. Inside the mausoleum, the tone is more reassuring in places, with lengthy descriptions of paradise adorning some of the walls. Remember, that's where his wife is interned, so this makes sense. The central focus is provided by passages on the upper cenotaph Umumat's Mahal. The words of the Quranic prayer, recited by angels, implore Allah to allow the faithful to enter paradise, a touching request for God's mercy toward his devout servant, Mumtaz Mahal. Here is the interior. Now you, of course, are not allowed to enter this area. So here is where his wife lives. Now you can tell that he was not originally meant to be here, next to her. Look how it's almost seemingly haphazardly placed upon this repeating beautiful geometry of the floor tile. It is larger. He was the emperor. He's more important. But again, it wasn't originally meant to be there. Here's again the exterior. Here's another view from the other side. Notice the lamp. On the documentary, it discussed the significance of lamps, especially within mosques. Some other architectural elements this is an example of bilateral symmetry. So the left and right side are mirror images of one another. And so there's this real emphasis on balance, of symmetry, of geometry, of this pattern. Chaharbagh is a Persian design used in gardens. So we see that Persian idea here. And it evokes visions of paradise. These two intersecting canals divide the gardens into 4 parts, and these symbolize the 4 parts, in this case, the 4 rivers of paradise, as described in the Quran. So there is our Taj Mahal. Okay, so we're going to look at an artwork of his father. But let's step back a little bit. So we're going to go 2 generations back and consider Akbar the Great, the Taj Mahal patron's grandfather. He helped the Mughal court become this vibrant artistic center. Now, he needed a male heir, and he was getting older, and he was really concerned about not having a male heir. So he sought out Sheikh Salim Kishti, and he was a Sufi holy man. So we have Sunni Shiite of Islam, and then we have the smaller minority of Sufi. And this is the more mystical aspect of Islam, more practice associated with like the whirling dervishes in Turkey. I saw some of those when I went to Turkey, so it's pretty cool. But so he sought out this Sufi holy man, and Sheikh Salim Kishti foretold the birth of his son. And so then his wife gave birth to Jahangir, who was Shah Jahan, the patron of the Taj Mahal's father. So we're going back a little bit. We're going to look at his father, Jahangir, called World Caesar. He was the son of Akbar the Great. First his name was Salim, and he changed it to World Caesar when he became the king. Now, the Mughal Empire is obviously an Islamic dynasty, but the majority of India is Hindu at this point. So just FYI, and we'll see some examples of how this is done peacefully under Jahangir's rule. In our Jahangir preferring a Sufi sheikh to kings by the artist Bishter. So this is another example of our Persian influence and how it's this miniature portrait or miniature painting, which is common in the Persian Empire. And so it transfers over to here, these miniature paintings. Now, another aspect is when he became prince, his name is Jahangir Caesar the World, but he also had this honorific title called Nur-ud-Din, the Light of Faith. Okay, so consider how, like even with the, how light is often associated with the divine, and how gold is associated with the divine. Even in Christianity, especially in the Middle Ages, gold is used throughout Christian artwork to symbolize the divine. It's the most expensive metal, so if you're showing reverence for someone or showing reverence for religious figures, or in this case kings, you're going to be using gold. And so we see that here. So our main central character, if we're looking at this compositionally, essentially since Emperor Jahangir, and he's portrayed in this commanding manner. He's sitting upright. He's atop this intricately adorned throne, somewhat reminiscent of a European design. He's on top of this sand hourglass, which I've read, some say it's more European. But either way, he's obviously elevated. He's seated on his knees. We also see hierarchy of scale. He's bigger than the other figures. We're analyzing his importance. Now, behind him, you'll see the gold, but we also see this element of the sun, with these rays of light, and a crescent moon. So the crescent moon is a symbol associated with Islam, but there's an argument that there's this theme of time throughout this painting. Of course, he's on an hourglass. Can't get more explicit than that. But also consider we have the sun and the moon. So this idea of time, of the day, and his rulership, highlighted by the gold surrounding him. His name, light of faith. And so these elements come through to reinforce his power and a respect for him by the artist. Now, surrounding Jahangir are these other figures, and they decrease in size with our hierarchy of scale to show their importance. Now, if we consider just the title, it's Jahangir preferring a Sufi sheikh to kings. Because remember, his father was foretold by a Sufi holy man of his own birth. So Jahangir is continuing this great respect for this Sufi holy man. Obviously his father, could you imagine after the birth of a son, how much more he respected this holy man, and so he imparted that respect with his son. So the king is giving this book to this Sufi sheikh, which is a holy object. We're so used to books in the Western world, or the modern day world, or I should say the Western world. But books are really revered by many cultures, especially during this time period. They're rare. Even like when I taught English in Thailand for a while, there was this great respect for books. Like you don't put books on the floor. And so that's really common. And so we see this here, how the king is giving a book to this holy man. But look at how he receives it. He receives it on this cloth, because he's not to touch the king in any manner. He's not going to be touching an object even at the same time of the king. That would have been disrespectful because he's so highly respected. Okay, so here's our Sufi holy man. Now, our artist Bishtar was known for his ability to create these detailed portraits in their likeness, and also his ability to depict hands. So we've already acknowledged that hands are difficult for artists to illustrate, and so he's showing off here. And he's also reiterating the importance of Jahangir. Look at how Jahangir has all this jewelry versus the holy man who is humble without jewelry. On his fingers he has rings and bracelets and pearls and earrings, and he's just extremely elaborate in dress compared to the others. So here we have an Ottoman Sultan, King James I of England. Okay. This portrait was based on a portrait that the artist had received. And we have the artist himself. So this shows his high status, that he's being depicted on the lowest level, but still in the same painting as the king. He was highly revered for his skill. So Jahangir has established these diplomatic relationships. He's acknowledging that and celebrating that. Here's a close-up of that book. I should have that on a different side. Now, let's consider these two angels. So, well, first of all, there's a few angels. We have these two up here, and they're up to different interpretations. This one has an arrow, and this one seems to be crying. Some arguments about maybe the passage of time. We're not really sure. We're going to focus on these clothed angels here, who are writing these prayers in this Persian text, essentially wishing that the king lives a long time. They want him to reign a long time. And so there's this prayer and this hope for that. Here is our artist, and he is showing off by having a depiction of, or having a painting within a painting The elephant is associated as the symbol for the Mughal Empire. So we see that here. He is in this yellow robe, and that indicates that he is Hindu. So he is a Hindu court painter for the Islamic king. And so that shows the sense of peace, and again, even the diplomatic relationships with others that he had. So attesting to his power. Now this is a page from this book that's been split up, and numerous museums have different parts of this over time. So it's a folio, Folio, which is a page from like this larger album. And again, it's been split amongst different museums. They have different pages. Okay, so let's head over to Spain. We'll be heading to Granada, Spain, and looking at Alhambra. So as you can see, it's atop, this beautiful hill overlooking the city, and you can tell by the wall that it is a fortress. So it's gone through a series of different stages over the centuries. First, it was obviously a fortress, this military fortress, and then later changed into this palatial retreat for the royals. We'll look at the palace, but it still has some military aspects and barracks, and later, once the Christians conquered this region again, then it was changed into a church. So it's seen different ages. So this is under Islamic Spain. So Spain is a really interesting place. I had the fortunate opportunity to go there when I was in college, and it is unlike the rest of Europe. I mean, each country is different, but it has this really unique architecture that's described as Moorish. It was even described as that when I was there. And it reflects this mix of this Islamic and Christian. Even going back further, this was under Roman control for a long period of time. And then the Visigoths and Christianity, and then Islam, and then Christianity again. So it has this really unique architecture that I haven't seen elsewhere. It's a really cool place to visit. So we're just going to look at a few aspects of this structure. Here we are with this. We see, of course, a fountain and these elements of a garden design and this Moorish architecture. And let's just take a moment to appreciate this prime example of our Moorish architecture. From the beautiful, ornate tile work to just the incredible carving. You can imagine the skill of this craftsman, the amount of time that went into creating this is just extraordinary. Meticulous planning, etc. We'll come back to that room, actually. So let's head outside to the Court of the Lions, one of the courtyards within this larger complex. I should say the whole complex is about 26 acres, so we're just looking at a small portion. But let's look at the Court of the Lions. And so this is a great example of this Islamic geometric design, symbolic representation, as well as engineering, because this fountain is continuously going and the water is moving throughout it. So it's another example of our Chahar Bagh with this quadrilateral garden based on the 4 gardens of paradise. Back to that. So let's talk about this fountain and it being the Court of Lions. So this is where they would receive visitors, etc. This is where they would have these gatherings for the Nasrid rulers. This is under the Nasrid dynasty. Courtiers, they're going to host elaborate ceremonies here, receptions, cultural events. Architectural grandeur, both within this courtyard, and we'll look at one of the rooms nearby adjacent to it, attests to the power of this dynasty. Now remember, throughout all of time, even from the beginning of civilization in Mesopotamia, these larger, dominant, predatory cats are associated with power. So here we see these lions that help to represent this dynasty and help to reinforce the idea of this power. So we'll head over to this room again, called the Hall of the Sisters. Now these niches, we see these more honeycomb makernas. See right here? And actually, let me come right back. I skipped over this. Here's, just the portico, the surrounding porch of this outside courtyard. You can imagine strolling along here and hearing the fountain, but also just the extremely intricate design and the Arabic calligraphy throughout it. Now, some argue that these elements that are hanging down are reminiscent of stalactites within a cave. So it adds this other element to it all. Interesting. Okay, sorry, so back to the Hall of the Sisters. And here we have just this ornately carved, just honeycomb design. So you can, I mean, no wonder you would, this breathtaking design, you would want dignitaries and your courtiers and visitors to see this. So here we are, interior, and looking at the dome. So this incredible repeating pattern, this play of light and shadow, it's extremely mesmerizing. This magnificent dome has this honeycomb design with these 1,000 cells and these different colors. It's just so intricate. So there's Alhambra. Let's talk about the bifolio from the Quran, written in gold, parchment, and ink. So this is not paper, this is parchment, which is leather, animal skin. So one of the reasons why it somewhat lasted. Now, not all Qurans very much vary in design, but let's just appreciate for a moment again of Arabic calligraphy lending itself to looking like art just in the writing, with this beautiful Kufic script. I realize I don't have it spelled here, K-U-F-I-C. So this is a bifolio, so 2 pages from the book of the Quran. The Quran is the most sacred text of Islam. It means recitation, spelled several ways. And so the different chapters are called surahs. Now these words were compiled after the death of Muhammad, and so it's extremely sacred. This is the word of God. Now Arabic is written from right to left, so the opposite of English. Now, we've already rediscussed the idea of gold being associated with the divine. And we're still under the Nasrid dynasty, and so they're patronizing these works of art. They're celebrating Islam. And so they're showing off their wealth, and they're using gold on this parchment to create the holy words of God. And so they're showing that. In other examples of the Quran, they may use gold just to mark the beginning of a surah or a chapter, and so it just depends. But of course, this one you can tell is using gold throughout it, and so it has this fusion of these geometric and also these floral motifs with the medallions, and so it's just this masterful synthesis of artistic skill, cultural heritage, religion, devotion. You can imagine the sacred action of the person who is writing this and the amount of time and respect they have while creating this. And there is the end of our first lecture.